Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future deep dives. Today we're going to be exploring a topic that's super important to international law and global justice, the International Criminal Court, or ICC for short.
Right.
Whether you're a UPSC aspirant, a student of international relations, or just someone who wants to understand the world a little bit better, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, it's a topic that a lot of people find really complicated, but when you really get down to it, the ICC is it's based on a really powerful idea.
Okay.
The idea that it doesn't matter who you are or how powerful you are, if you commit really serious crimes against humanity, you can be held accountable.
Wow, that's a powerful concept, and I think it's really captured the imagination of people all over the world.
Yeah.
But the ICC is also a pretty new institution. I mean, it was only established in 1998 with the Rome Statute,
Right.
and its journey has been, well, let's just say it's been kind of complicated.
Yeah, definitely not straightforward.
So let's start, at the beginning. What is the ICC? How does it work? And why should we even care about it?
Well, one way to think about the ICC is as this global court of last resort. You see, it's not supposed to replace national courts, but to step in when those courts can't or won't prosecute individuals for the worst possible crimes.
Okay.
We're talking about things like genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and even the crime of aggression.
So it's kind of like a safety net for international justice.
Exactly.
Okay, like that.
And to do this really important work, the ICC has a very specific structure with different branches, and each branch has its own, important function.
Okay, so let's break down the structure.
Sure.
I know from my reading that the ICC has four main organs,
That's right.
but they're not always the easiest to understand.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's kind of like a machine where each part is needed for the court to run properly.
Right.
So first, you've got the Assembly of States Parties. Think of them like a board of directors.
Okay.
They control the budget and choose the judges and the prosecutor.
So it's made up of representatives from every country that signed the Rome Statute.
Exactly. Then there's the presidency, which is led by the ICC president. And the president is actually elected from the judges.
Wow. Okay.
They're really important because they coordinate the judicial work, they manage all the external relations, and they even assign the judges to the different cases.
I see. So they're basically the face of the ICC, right?
Yeah, you could say that. They make sure everything runs smoothly and that people hear what the court has to say.
I see. Okay.
And then there are the judicial divisions, which are really at the heart of everything the ICC does. They're the ones who handle the cases from the very beginning all the way to the final verdict. And there are three divisions: pre-trial, trial, and appeals. Each one has their own set of responsibilities.
That's really interesting how it mirrors, the structure of a lot of national legal systems.
It does, yeah.
With the different stages for looking at the evidence and the arguments and making sure there's a fair trial.
Exactly. And of course, any criminal court needs a prosecutor. Right.
Yeah.
At the ICC, the Office of the Prosecutor handles the investigations. They gather evidence, and then, they ultimately present the cases against the people accused of these terrible crimes.
Wow. So they're like the detectives of the ICC.
That's a good way to think about it. They have to very carefully put the case together and then present it to the judges.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
Especially when you're dealing with these kinds of crimes that often need really complex international investigations and cooperation between different countries.
Yeah, it can get really complicated.
So besides the four main organs you just talked about, does the ICC have any other, key parts?
Yeah, there are a few others. There's the registry. It's basically the administrative heart of the court, keeping everything running behind the scenes. And then there's the trust fund for victims, which is incredibly important because it gives support to those who have suffered as a result of these crimes.
That's something I find really interesting about the ICC. It's not just focused on punishing the bad guys, but also on giving justice and support to the victims.
It is. That's very important.
I mean, the Trust Fund for Victims offers so many different services like financial assistance, psychological counseling, even help with rebuilding their lives and their communities.
It's really about recognizing that true justice means taking care of those who have been directly affected by these horrible crimes.
Right.
And it's not just about, punishing the people who did it.
Okay, so speaking of these crimes and their impact, how does the ICC actually get involved in a case? How do they choose who to prosecute and where their jurisdiction actually applies?
That's a great question. Now we're getting into one of the things that makes the ICC so unique and honestly pretty controversial. The ICC's jurisdiction, or, its power to investigate and prosecute these cases, is a really complex part of international law. There are basically three ways the ICC can actually use its jurisdiction.
This is where it gets a little tricky for people who are just learning about international law, huh?
It can be, yeah. But let's try to break it down. The most common way the ICC gets involved is when the crime happens, when it's committed by someone who's a citizen of a state that has agreed to the Rome Statute,
Okay.
or if it happens within the territory of one of those states.
So if you're a citizen of a country that's a member of the ICC, you're basically under their rules no matter where you commit the crime.
That's right.
And if the crime happens in an ICC member state, you're also under their jurisdiction, even if you're not a citizen.
Exactly. It's about holding individuals accountable no matter where the crime happens, as long as there's some kind of connection to a state that's part of the ICC.
So it's like this big global legal web, all connected by the Rome Statute.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Okay, cool.
Now, the second way the ICC can get involved is if the UN Security Council asks them to. So even if a situation isn't normally under the ICC's jurisdiction, the Security Council can refer it to the court.
Ah.
And that gives the ICC the power to investigate and prosecute.
So this really shows how complicated the relationship is between the ICC and the UN, right?
It does.
I mean, the ICC is technically part of the UN, but they have this agreement that allows for these referrals.
Right. And this referral power has been used in some really important cases, bringing situations that might otherwise be outside of the ICC's reach into their court.
So it also shows how political international justice can be,
It does, yeah.
The Security Council is made up of these powerful states with their own interests and agendas.
Absolutely. The ICC has to operate within this whole world of international relations and power dynamics. Now, the third and final way the ICC can start an investigation is on its own. It's called proprio motu, but they can only do this under very specific conditions.
So they can't just investigate anything they want whenever they want.
No, definitely not. They need a referral from a state party or the UN Security Council, and it has to meet some pretty strict legal requirements. The ICC's jurisdiction is very carefully defined to make sure they're only acting within their powers and respecting the sovereignty of each state.
Right. Which brings us to another really important principle of the ICC, complementarity.
Yes, complementarity is key to how the ICC works. It basically means that the ICC is there to help national justice systems, not to replace them.
Okay.
So they only step in when national courts are unwilling or unable to actually prosecute people for these serious crimes.
So like a backup system.
Exactly. It's this delicate balance between respecting a state's sovereignty and making sure that someone is held responsible for the worst crimes under international law.
It makes sense. Okay, so we've got this global court with a really complex way of deciding who they can prosecute and this commitment to working with national courts.
Right.
But where does India fit into all of this?
Well, that's a question that comes up a lot, especially since India is such a major player on the world stage.
And it's a really relevant question for our listeners in India,
Yes, definitely.
especially for anyone who's getting ready for the UPSC exams, where it's crucial to understand India's position on these international organizations.
Exactly. So to answer your question, India has chosen not to join the ICC. They haven't signed the Rome Statute, so they're not a member.
So what are the reasons behind India's decision?
Well, India has had a few concerns over the years, things like protecting their sovereignty, the potential for bias, and even the ways certain crimes are defined under the Rome Statute.
I see. Well, let's unpack those concerns a bit, because I think they can give us a better idea of how India sees international justice and their place in the global legal order.
Okay.
So one of the main things that India has brought up is the impact on its sovereignty.
Right. They're very focused on protecting their national interests and their ability to make their own decisions. There's a feeling that joining the ICC could expose India to outside influence or limit their freedom to act in their own best interests.
And there's definitely a historical context here. India has a long history of non-alignment.
Yeah.
And they've often been cautious about anything they see as interference in their internal affairs.
Exactly. Another issue for India has been how the crime of aggression is defined. It was added to the Rome Statute later on.
It's funny how the definition of a crime, something that seems so basic, can cause so much disagreement and even prevent countries from working together.
Yeah, it can.
Why is that?
Well, The crime of aggression is really sensitive because it's about when a state uses force. It's a highly political issue with really big consequences.
I see.
India is worried that the definition is too subjective and could be used against them unfairly.
So there's a sense that the ICC, even though it's trying to uphold international law, could also be used as a political tool, maybe even to put pressure on countries that don't agree with the more powerful nations.
Yeah, that's a perspective that many countries have, not just India. And it leads into another concern that India has, the possibility of bias within the ICC.
So the idea that even though the ICC wants to be impartial, it could still be influenced by global power dynamics and political interests.
Exactly. There are concerns about how they judge cases, who the judges and staff are, and even the influence of powerful states that give a lot of money to the ICC.
So it really matters who gets to define and enforce international justice. And these concerns aren't just theoretical, right? I mean, they have real-world consequences for the ICC and its ability to do what it's set out to do.
Absolutely. It's this complex mix of legal principles, political considerations, and historical context. And while India has chosen to stay out of the ICC for now, their perspective really highlights the challenges and the debates about how to achieve international justice.
It's a good reminder that the effort to create a more just and accountable world is a process, not something that happens overnight. And it needs dialogue, understanding different points of view, and finding ways to bridge the gap between what we want and what's actually possible.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because the ICC, despite all its limitations and the controversies, has undeniably had a real impact on the world.
It's amazing to me how the ICC, even without every country being a member, has really changed the conversation about holding people accountable for these horrific crimes.
Yeah. One of the most important things the ICC has done is focus on stopping people from getting away with crimes against children and women. A lot of the cases they've taken on have been about gender crimes, which shows how committed they are to addressing these terrible things that have often been ignored or silenced.
It reminds us that justice isn't just about punishing the people who do these things, but also about protecting those who are most vulnerable and understanding the specific ways that conflict and violence affect different groups of people.
And even beyond the individual cases, the fact that the ICC exists has pushed states to do better. It's encouraged them to make their own laws stronger and to actually investigate crimes more thoroughly because they know the ICC might step in if they don't.
So even in countries that haven't joined the ICC, just having it there can make a difference. It can push for more accountability and respect for international law.
Exactly. It's kind of like setting a standard, a model for what justice should look like, and that can have a big impact even outside of the ICC's direct influence.
But let's be real, the ICC isn't perfect. It's gotten some criticism, and there are some valid concerns about its limitations and the challenges it faces.
Right. One of the biggest problems is that the ICC doesn't have its own way to enforce its decisions. It has to rely on countries to cooperate, to arrest suspects, freeze assets, and carry out sentences.
So it's like a global court without a global police force, which must make things really tough, especially when you're dealing with powerful countries or situations that are really politically sensitive.
Exactly. And because they have to depend on states to cooperate, that's led to inconsistencies in how they choose their cases, and sometimes it's kept them from dealing with the really tough situations.
And that's led to accusations of bias, right?
It has.
People say that the ICC goes after weaker states more often while ignoring the crimes of the powerful nations.
Those are fair points, and they show how power imbalances in the world can affect even the best-intentioned organizations. It's a reminder that even with institutions like the ICC, politics and power still play a role.
Then you have all the practical challenges, like really long trials, a ton of bureaucracy, and not enough resources to deal with the growing number of cases.
Those are all real problems that can make the ICC less effective and lead to these delays that can be really frustrating for people who are looking for justice.
So it's pretty clear that even though the ICC is a remarkable achievement in a lot of ways, it's still a work in progress. It's this complex organization trying to operate in an even more complex global system.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study and engage with. It represents this effort of humanity to try to achieve justice, to hold people accountable, and to create a world where the worst crimes don't just go unpunished.
It's a journey, not a finish line. And understanding the ICC, how it works, its jurisdiction, and its weaknesses is so important for anyone who wants to grapple with the complicated world of international law and global justice.
And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC exams or studying in international relations, the ICC is something you'll probably encounter over and over again. It really reflects so many of the big issues and debates that are shaping the world right now.
So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking the tough questions. Because in the end, if we want a world that's more just and accountable, we all need to be involved, informed, and ready to challenge the way things are.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the International Criminal Court.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. We hope you found it informative and interesting. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future deep dives.
And like always, we want to hear what you think. Join the conversation on social media, share your views, and let's keep this discussion going. Until next time, keep diving deep.